morning, committee members. The clerk has a quorum, and those appearing virtually have been sound tested and have been approved. With that, I will begin the 42nd meeting of the Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and Status of Persons with Disabilities. Pursuant to the motion adopted on Monday, May 4, 2026, the committee is meeting on homelessness in Canada for the first hour and housing starts for the second hour. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending remotely and in the room. Before I begin, please, you have the option to participate in today's meeting in the official language of your choice. If you're in the room, please select the channel that gives you the proper interpretation for you. Those appearing virtually, please click on the globe icon at the bottom of your surface. Choose the official language you wish to participate in. If there is an interruption in translation, please get my attention. We'll suspend while it is corrected. As I indicated, those appearing virtually have been tested and the sound quality meets the requirements for translation. As well, please, those in the room, put your devices on silence, including myself. Forgot that. On silent, and please refrain from tapping on the microphone boom in front of you for the benefit protection of our translators. As well, please wait until I recognize you by name before proceeding. With that, we'll introduce the witness for the first hour, and we had a minor change. In homelessness, from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, Michelle Beaulieu, Mayor, City of Timmins. And appearing for Jasper Place Wellness Center, we have Taylor Soroka, co-founder, Jasper Place Wellness Center. And Réseau Solidarité Entrepreneurs de Quebec, Eric Edstrom, Public and Media Affairs Officer. Each witness has 5 minutes, and we'll begin with Madame Beaulieu. Madame.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Standing Committee. My name is Michelle Beaulieu. I am the Mayor of the City of Timmins in the north of Ontario, and I'm also the Chair of FCM Standing Committee on Social and Economic Development. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, which represents more than 2,000 municipalities and nearly 90% of the Canadian population. Well, I will tell you at the outset that this study could not be more timely. Across Canada, cities and small towns alike are facing a homelessness crisis that is growing in scale and complexity. Shelters are under pressure, encampments are multiplying, and local services are being stretched to the limit.
Strategy is a critical opportunity to learn from experience and build on what is working. Municipalities are at the front line of this crisis, and we see its human impacts firsthand. These are our neighbors. Because we're rooted in our communities, we understand what is needed on the ground, but we cannot solve homelessness alone. We all have a part to play, and now is not the time to walk away. Real and meaningful progress requires all orders of government pulling in the same direction to ensure our most vulnerable residents are not left behind. Provinces and territories oversee many of the health, social service, and housing supports that people rely on. The federal government plays a critical leadership role through investments and national policy coordination. A renewed national housing strategy must be anchored in a housing-first approach. FCM welcomes federal investments to increase the supply of affordable, non-market housing. But buildings alone, as we know, do not solve homelessness. Communities also need operating funding alongside capital funding so that supportive housing providers can deliver mental health supports, addiction services, outreach, and case management. And we also need to move beyond crisis response and embrace prevention. The most effective way to reduce homelessness is to keep people housed in the first place. Every day, Canadians are falling into homelessness more and more because of rising rents, economic pressures, but they're above all falling through system gaps. Investments such as rent supplements, portable housing benefits, and programs like the Canada Housing Benefit can prevent homelessness before it begins by helping low-income households remain stably housed. As we know, prevention is not only more humane, it is also far less costly than responding after someone has already lost their housing. FCM's most urgent recommendation is to maintain and expand Reaching Home. It is the backbone of local homelessness responses across Canada, supporting shelters, outreach teams, housing stabilization services, Indigenous-led initiatives, encampment responses, and the community organizations working every day to help people move from homelessness into housing, because they are helping people move through the continuum. Yet demand is growing much faster than available resources. Communities across Canada are being asked to respond to record levels of homelessness with funding that does not reflect the scale of today's challenge. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has identified an annual funding gap of approximately $3.5 billion in Canada's homelessness response system. Municipalities are making up that gap, and we see the consequences of that gap every day. Shelters operating beyond capacity, growing encampments, overstretched outreach services, and vulnerable Canadians unable to access the supports they need. FCM is calling on Ottawa not only to renew Reaching Home, but to make it permanent and expanded pillar of Canada's homelessness response. Les municipalités sont prêtes à travailler en
Municipalities are ready to partner with the federal government to deliver results, but communities need predictable, long-term funding for this to happen. Allowing this program to sunset or failing to scale it to meet today's realities would place significant pressure on communities already struggling to meet growing demand. Homelessness is one of Canada's defining social challenges. The renewal of the National Housing Strategy provides a rare opportunity to strengthen partnerships across governments, invest in homelessness prevention, and expand housing-first solutions. Let's not wait until we reach a point of non-return.
Territories, Indigenous partners, and community organizations to achieve that goal. And so I look forward to answering your questions. Merci, miigwech.
Merci, Madame Beaulieu. Ms. Soroka, for 5 minutes, please.
Yes. Thank you, Chair, and good morning to members of the committee. My name is Taylor Soraka, and I'm the co-founder of the Jasper Place Wellness Center here in Edmonton, Alberta, a community development organization I founded together with my father, Murray, who regrettably couldn't join us today. I know he would have liked to be here. It's an honor to contribute to this committee study on homelessness in Canada, and I thank you for the invitation. I want to begin with a distinction I believe is foundational to this study and to getting policy right. Homelessness is not complicated. It is complex, and that difference is costing lives. Our organization works in a community that knows complexity up close. Edmonton is the city of champions, but we're also the frostbite capital of Canada, a city where temperatures fall to -30, where people lose their fingers, their feet, and ultimately their lives, not to some abstract failure, but because they had nowhere safe to go. But I know complexity does not fit on a policy form. It does not communicate well to a frightened public watching encampments grow outside their windows. So we have done what humans do with things we cannot hold. We've named the most visible, most basic surface feature and called that the problem. No home, homeless. And collapsing that enormous human complexity into a single administrative category, we've named the symptom and lost sight of the patient. The word groups together residential school survivors and the person with a traumatic brain injury, the young woman who aged out of foster care at 18 with nowhere safe to go, the veteran, and the man living with untreated bipolar disorder. What they share is one thing, no safe place to call their own. And what they don't share is anything else. That's the complexity. And it's not hard to understand. It's human. The pace at which this crisis is growing has created a common misunderstanding. When people see encampments in their parks or when they feel unsafe walking through their own neighborhood, they conclude the solutions must not be working. I understand that, but the truth is the opposite. Housing first works, supportive housing works, and the research is not ambiguous, but they are being outpaced. And an outpaced solution looks identical to a failed one, unless you know the numbers. In Edmonton, the average wait time to access supportive housing is 512 days. 512 days in the frostbite capital of Canada, in the city of champions. And that wait exists because we have not built enough, but it's not only about supply. Too much of what we have built has been designed to scale rather than to the person, with large facilities where no one knows your name, never mind your story. And for our neighbors living with the most complex needs, deep psychosis, severe mental illness, brain injury, that design feature is the most costly of all. They need the most from their housing: psychiatric care, clinical support, real intensity. Housing is the foundational solution, always. But the supports inside it have to match the people it's for. And that's a real gap we're facing and one we have to build next. When we respond to complexity of a human being with enforcement, with encampment clearances, and with removal of the visible signs of suffering rather than what it causes, we're not solving the problem. We're moving it. We're breaking the trust that makes intervention possible. We are choosing, in the language of my field, social control over social care. And the data is consistent. It costs more, produces worse outcomes, and makes the work of organizations like mine profoundly harder. At the Jasper Place Wellness Center, we fit in the gaps where systems fail people, and we do it through a design called the Healing House. Start with the building, because the building itself is a solution. Housing is always the answer, and a healing house is first and foremost housing. Each one sits on a single city lot, 12 self-contained units. The entire main floor is common space, a kitchen where residents can cook together, watch the Oilers, the best team in Canada, and hold house meetings, do chores, and access therapy and programming. The whole building is fully accessible. Research is clear that communities of 8 to 12 people produce better outcomes for those navigating severe mental health and complex trauma. We built that finding into the walls. Then on top of housing, you layer a program, and now you have an intervention. Programs come and go with funding cycles. That's the reality of this work. But when capital funding built a healing house, it built essential infrastructure that stands for a lifetime. If the program ends, the building keeps housing people as affordable housing, as supportive housing, whatever the community needs next. And the investment is never lost. For a federal government deciding where dollars go, I cannot overstate how important that distinction is. 2 programs currently operate out of our healing houses today, each one built at an intersection where the system loses people. Bridge Healing sits between the emergency department and the street. When someone is discharged from an Edmonton hospital with nowhere to go, they come to us, into a healing house with wraparound supports, healthcare access, income navigation, housing assessments, connection to treatment. $140 a day compared to upwards of $1,000 in hospital. And the outcome, a 76% reduction in healthcare utilization among participants. And that number is not just a program result, it's proof of the housing first model, that if you stabilize someone first, if you start with housing, everything else changes. Recovery and transition sits between detox and residential treatment, a gap that historically meant relapse. A person completes detox, is medically stable, and has confirmed intake date. We hold the space, we keep the thread from breaking.
Sorry, any points you missed, you can follow up. You can capture those in response to questions, which I'm sure you'll get. Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now conclude the witness opening statements with Mr. Edstrom for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting Quebec Homelessness Solidarity Network to appear before you today. I have been following committee's work so far, and I'd be happy to lean into homelessness prevention. Given the limited time we have for each speaker, I wanted to adopt a different approach and let committee members to ask further questions inspired by the MP4 Bro-Missisquoi. In doing that, now, would more flexible funding allow associations to provide better services and be more efficient? If we get rid of the uncertainty around funding and make it more stable, then changes could be expected. because the alternative would be closing spaces due to a lack of funding. Should we offer prevention as a social and economic investment to serve the entirety of the population with better conditions in terms of health and well-being by reducing reliance on public services, increasing social and economic participation, and by avoiding the trauma of homelessness and supporting these individuals at the right time. So yes, beyond the financial cost, it's an investment in human beings. Now, do shelters create a vicious cycle? Shelters are the last resort of a system that have failed individuals in these situations. They do not make homelessness more permanent, but it is the first step in a long journey in which there are few adapted services where individuals are reconstructing their relationship with others and the society. Shelters are covering the basic needs, but also helps individuals reintegrate back into the society from a social, residential, economic, and other perspectives. We are, in some way, actually creating hidden homelessness. We have to respect the right to adequate housing that is safe, healthy, and not overcrowded. Now, what's the main challenge when it comes to the level of current funding and the distribution and the administration of the funding? Well, we would like improvements on both fronts. We need more funding under Reaching Home. As homelessness is everywhere, we need to take these steps, and we need more predictability in the management of the program. Information should be provided with advance to give associations enough time to adapt. And finally, Build Canada Homes wants to build more housing, but social housing has morphed into affordable housing. That's the terminology that's now being used, but we need social housing. We need to build the housing that the people need and not what companies want to build. There is a cultural difference between Housing First and the approach that we are using. We need to improve some aspects of the global approach in the aftermath of what we have seen after the pandemic. Of course, the provinces are left with the majority of the burden. We, of course, need a version of Reaching Home. Some agreements have already been signed, and some improvements have already been made, and we have been lacking more predictable funding. So you will also receive a written submission from us with some key references to our global approach. And hopefully that will be useful in your recommendations. And we will continue to provide a large definition of homelessness. Of course, it deserves to be discussed at length, as we did in a meeting we organized in November in Quebec. We need to reverse the trends in homelessness, and we need to adapt according to the needs on the ground. Of course, there is a place for innovation, but there are some old approaches that still work. So thank you, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Monsieur Edstrom. We will begin the first 6-minute round with Ms. Falk.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'd like to thank each of the witnesses for taking their time to be here and also sharing their expertise and knowledge in this. Ms. Soroka, you're very close to where I am, even though you're in another province. I'm located in Lloydminster, so there's a lot of transportation back and forth for a lot of people in my community and my riding to Edmonton. I will say you did talk about without saying wraparound services, but the importance of wraparound services and how important that is, that's embedded not only in housing, but I would argue in every area when we're looking at social services. They're just, sometimes people just need that extra support to just boost them up, to help them out. We have a great organization in Lloydminster. It's on the Alberta side of the border. So we have our own issues when it comes to funding, right? Because we have some things that are physically located on the Alberta side or the Saskatchewan side, and you have residents of either side, and you've got governments who are saying, well, that's not our responsibility because that's not our citizen. But at the end of the day, homelessness or addictions knows no boundaries. And at the end of the day, people need to be treated like people. And the organization that we have is called Residents in Recovery. And so it is a great model, and it's people living together, and it's accountability, it's community, it's that number that you talked about, 10 people that are together, really helping each other out, which is important. So I just wanted to make a note of the importance of those wraparound services. Throughout this study, we've heard testimony on the importance of prevention in reducing homelessness. So I'm just wondering, based on your organization's experience, what prevention measures do you believe are most effective in helping people avoid homelessness?
Thank you for the question. For prevention, funding for individual participants, for individual community members in providing rent, in rent supplements, is the number one way we can prevent homelessness. Direct funding. So if someone gets sick and isn't working for 2 weeks out of the month, they can still pay their rent. So that direct, clear to access, easy to access funding that can supplement someone's gap, because we are all just a flicker away. We can all face gaps in our lives. That's the best way.
For sure, yeah. Any one of us can have an incident or a tragedy or a setback that can drastically change the trajectory of one's life, for sure. Who or which level of government do you believe is best to address or administer that? Would that be, because I did hear earlier testimony, I want to say it was FCM, of just about local being able to know what's going on in their community, that type of thing. And sometimes I know from sitting in an Ottawa vantage point, Ottawa doesn't know best when it comes to communities, especially rural communities like my own, where like if you need to go to a doctor, that's a 2.5 hour drive. So if you don't have a car, if you don't have somebody that can drive you, how do you get to your specialist appointment? If you're then paying for an ambulance, then that's another cost, right? That isn't necessarily covered. So who would be the best to administer individual assistance like you've suggested?
I would agree that it should be on the community, on the ground, local organizations, because local organizations are who know the individuals by name who need that support. And it allows the support to happen fast, timely to their situation. But I will highlight, exactly like you said, this includes the municipal, it includes the provincial, and it includes the federal. Healthcare access is a huge part of our homelessness crisis, and you hit it on the head. But local, clear to the person connections is how that money will move fastest and have the most impact.
It's also good to hear that your organization, I know when I did my social work experience, it was in a medical setting. So we actually weren't permitted to discharge people without a place to go to. I don't know how that's changed in the space of just the increase of our homeless population, since COVID, the burden on our healthcare system. There just is not enough beds, there's not enough doctors, there's not enough. So it's good to hear even just where you guys are positioned, that you guys are able to catch some of those people, because then if you're not, at the end of the day, they're just coming right back, right? And especially in the wintertime, when it does get cold, you're then trying to navigate the emergency room as an emergency room as opposed to like a drop-in shelter, right? So it's important that those gaps are being met, or people aren't falling through the cracks, I guess, in that. So that's great to hear that you're doing that. I just one last question. At what point in a person's housing instability is intervention most likely to be successful?
I think that depends on every person, and they know best. The people I serve on a daily basis know when they need housing and know when they need support and know what that support looks like. So for every person, I do think that looks different in terms of housing intervention. But in my experience, every person I serve has known what they've needed. They have the agency to tell me exactly what that looks like. I just don't always have the tools to meet them and meet their need where they're at.
So do you
for
find
the intervention?
Sorry, one quick follow up? Sorry. So are you finding that there is a willingness for those that need services to ask for services, or are you finding that your organization has to go out and seek to find people?
We have upwards of 100 people accessing our community center throughout the day, and those are unique individuals, so they are coming to us. But I will point out that our emergency departments in Edmonton and across Canada are inundated with people looking for support. It just might not be the right place. So people are looking for help always. They just might not find the right person to help them.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Falk, Monsieur Joseph, pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I will be asking my questions to Mr. Edstrom. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the work you are doing to help people in vulnerable situations. So my first question is very simple and short. You referred to an interesting point, in my opinion. Now, with more predictability and flexibility, we can definitely achieve more to fight against homelessness with regard to encampments that are being banalized and are becoming normal. So could you maybe give us a bit more background on that? Well, when we talk about fighting against homelessness, year after year, with everything that we have been seeing, with the conditions getting worse, we have to keep an open mind and not look to manage spaces rather than individuals or people. So we should have a wider right to housing and not focus on a right to encampments, as it were. The encampments exist. That's a reality. Normally, no one chooses to live in an encampment. It's usually a temporary situation, which sometimes takes a while to resolve. But normally, individuals need to be reintegrated quickly, and we have methods of working with people in such situations. And people know sometimes they're not always ready to take the leap when we get into contact with them, so the conditions need to be right. A person who lives in an encampment, and some might have substance abuse issues. I mean, you need to meet people where they are or meet them at the right moment. If you wait for 3 or 5 weeks, it can get worse, and the relationships they have with other people might mean that they continue using. So you need to meet them at the right point in time and provide them a whole range of services. That is what's important. So you need to have those services ready, and you need to be ready to meet people when they're ready to come out of those encampments. How do you think we can find the right balance between our short-term interventions and the objective of avoiding these encampments becoming more and more entrenched? Well, we should not tolerate the intolerable. We should not just give up and say, well, this is the reality and we have to live with these encampments. If we have encampments, it's because these people fell through the cracks. An eviction, for instance, a work accident, a separation could lead people to live in the street in a vulnerable situation. So we have to have these layers. We have to do a large prevention. So if we do that, then there's fewer chances for people to end up in those situations. When they are going through crises, we need to have the right means to catch them. And in these key moments, a person's life can change. and we need to prevent them from starting to experience homelessness rather than focusing on the interventions. Okay, I'll have another question about Build Canada Homes. Are you in favor of the main direction and mandate of building affordable housing? In Longueuil, for instance, there's a project with more than 1,500 units of housing, non-market housing. Do you think non-market housing is an important tool, a complementary tool, given the billions of dollars of investment that have been announced for transitional housing? It is a complementary aspect, but everything that's non-market, affordable housing, deferred affordable housing, it could mean many different things. Social housing is more clear as a definition. It meets people's needs. Of course, it helps to build housing, and we need a lot of catch-up that needs to be done in all types of housing, but we have to be careful about the definition of affordable housing. Of course, Build Canada Homes have these capital projects. We need to see how they're implemented, what kinds of units of housing are built, where these go, what families these serve. So is it done in close collaboration with the community? For instance, the case with Longueuil. So the devil is in the details. We will have to see how things are implemented on the ground. Yes, of course, we welcome a significant investment to fight against homelessness, which is very, very important, globally speaking. But it's not just about building. The wraparound services are also very, very important, because otherwise you're not really fixing all of these other problems. When everything you've known is the street, maybe you don't feel right in an apartment. All you want to do is go back to what you have known for a while. So there's also that aspect of things which underlines the importance of having support services. 30 seconds. So these services to accompany individuals, could you maybe talk to us about what these represent? Well, there are all kinds of services. It could be on mental health front or physical health front, which might have been degraded. People have social relationship issues. If you don't have the nurses or the support personnel, sometimes you end up closing some of these or shutting some of these services down. So you need everything to make people feel right. Thank you, Mr. Joseph. Ms. Laroche, for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for being with us today. Our witnesses online, you provided quite an interesting perspective and the municipal perspective. So I might have questions for you later on, but my first questions will go to Mr. Erstrom from Quebec as the MP for Shefford, with Granby, of course, in being in that region. Unfortunately, I work in this file quite a bit, and we've seen changing trends with regard to homelessness in our region. But the main problem for the municipality of Granby and your network, Quebec Homelessness Solidarity Network, of course, this concept of designated communities. As you would know, Granby is not a designated community despite the challenges and the needs we see on the ground. In terms of S3, we have, of course, Sherbrooke. Sherbrooke has its own challenges, but Granby also needs resources. So this question, this concept of designated communities, how do you see it? What does it need to be changed? And should Granby become a designated community? There are many cities in the same situation as Granby. I think homelessness has shifted quite a bit recently. Maybe previously people were going to the larger city centers. Now there's a bit of a tendency to stay closer to a person's community. So we need to have flexibility to adapt to changing conditions. Now, organizations that receive from Reaching Home or this other program in Quebec, they seem to be content with what they're receiving. They are able to spend the funding that they receive. Maybe we need a bit more flexibility in terms of services. For instance, in a more rural part of the country, social workers need to be more mobile because people are spread out, and we might need services that are not available locally. So we might need to take money from a certain envelope and put it somewhere else. So we end up money being in different silos that is a bit too rigid. So a bit more flexibility on that front would go a long way. Also, yes, you can have money, and of course, putting more money into Sherbrooke or in Granby or any other city, it could be a good idea, but you need to have a holistic vision. You cannot simply choose to build a bridge at a specific spot by looking at only one metric, for instance. So many communities have not been picked based on the state of affairs in 2021, 2022, but it's 2026. Things have changed, and the programs need to be able to adapt. Well, the work you do through your network, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you for this work that you have been doing. And with regard to reaching home, I have heard people asking for more flexibility, more predictability, but there's a lot of uncertainty with regard to what's going to happen with reaching home. Now, in my region, it's a program that's really, really appreciated. When there's uncertainty, will it be renewed? Will it not be renewed? Where are we headed? And some of the programs are also sunsetting. What kind of an impact does that have on organizations working in the homelessness file? Well, of course, when decisions are to be made, the lack of predictability doesn't really help. We need to adjust, or sometimes we have to spend money quickly towards the end of the year because we have a lot remaining in the budget, so our planning needs to reflect all of these requirements. So maybe there would be Build Canada Homes initiatives that could help us, but Reaching Home is indeed a good program. It's appreciated. We can improve it still, and we need to take these steps quickly, because Reaching Home mainly needs to be a bit more predictable and flexible, but overall, it's a program that has demonstrated that it works. Now, I know that there are different initiatives, mobile units that offer services. That's what's necessary. Now, with regard to prevention, of course, we need the housing to be available. We have heard some criticism of Build Canada Homes and affordable housing. Now, what is the impact of using a term that's a bit vague compared to something that is a bit more clear, such as social housing or community housing? Well, we know that the definition of social housing is clear. The cost is fixed. It's a percentage of an individual's income. But when you use other terms, the definition isn't very clear. We don't know what's non-market, what's affordable. Sometimes maybe some of this could meet people's needs, some of these units, but we have to define it specifically. When you say affordable housing, there is no set definition. So what is really affordable? It's very subjective. And I mean, maybe these units will be affordable in 20 years, but they might have other challenges by then, the people who might be interested in those units. So if you keep something for 10 years, maybe it will become affordable. Ms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Ms. Soroka, I'm going to start with you. I'm the Member of Parliament for Fort McMurray Cold Lake, so I'm relatively familiar with Edmonton, and I'm relatively familiar with some of the programs you run, specifically the Bridge Healing Program, which I think needs more attention because it's a really innovative program put forward in partnership between Alberta Health Services and your organization, working with the Royal Alex Foundation and others. And so I was just wondering if you can explain a little bit about what it is and what makes it different than basically every other program in Canada.
Wonderful, thank you. We were originally funded by Alberta Health Services. Today, our funding comes from ALSS, I forget what that's called. Someone can Google it. Bridge healing sits in between hospital and homelessness. So if you are unhoused and leaving the emergency department and we have vacancy, you come and stay with us. We do have wraparound supports, but one of the most unique things about this program is it's person-led. But I do want to be very clear before I explain person-led. Bridge healing fits into the continuum of housing programs that already exist. We catch people in the gap between emergency care and the street, but then we use housing first, we use supportive housing, we use seniors housing, veterans housing to get people to the next phase. But person-led means we meet people and see them as a whole person. We use emotional intelligence and try to help people unpack the backpack they've been carrying for the last 10, 20 years. We have healthcare aides, social workers, nurse practitioners, and it's health focused, but human centered and person led.
Eventually the microphone will turn on. Okay, fantastic. So one of the pieces, I was an MLA before I came here, and so we had lots of conversations about these kinds of programs. And one of the big pieces that a lot of people don't understand is when someone that's homeless ends up in the hospital, let's say their infection gets a little bit out of control. If they had a home to go to, they could be released far earlier because you know that they'd be able to maintain the hygiene requirements to prevent them from re-entering the hospital system. But if they don't have a home to go, they end up staying in the hospital at a cost to the taxpayer of substantially more money and in a place that is not actually home or home-like in any capacity. And so part of the concept of supporting organizations like yours from the government of Alberta, at least initially, and this is going back quite a few years, was the very concept of getting those people into a better program for what they actually needed so that they could get the support. Madame Beaulieu, or Bolo, sorry, I was just wondering, are there any programs like that in the Timmins region or anything like that that has that transitional housing to allow people to leave a hospital space or a medical space to get into transitional housing?
Oh, thank you very much for your question. In fact, I think it's timely because that's actually where we've identified the biggest gap in the continuum. I've been pleased to learn that we've actually just initiated a similar initiative called the Launchpad. And so that's an area, a room, a space in our current emergency shelter, but that's serving that same purpose. And so again, that idea of 8 to 12 people living still in a congregate setting, but being able to support each other. And so we are seeing that. However, we're finding now that due to its proximity to the emergency shelter, to encampments that have formed in the area, we might not be seeing the success that we could be seeing. That being said, we've still managed to house just in the past 6 months now. I'm already advanced behind my dates. Past 6 months, we've been able to house 23 people successfully, and they still maintain their housing. And so,
wonderful.
We know that this program could work.
And Ms. Soroka, I know coming from Fort McMurray and representing Fort McMurray Cold Lake, lots of people end up in the big city because it's easier to be homeless in an anonymous place where they don't have friends and family looking in on them all the time, and they can easily disappear. So how much of the population you guys serve is from outside of the Edmonton area?
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. I can't give you an exact percentage for the Bridge Healing Program, but across our programs, it's over 30% of people who don't call Edmonton their forever home. So we have people from Indigenous nations across Canada, Northern Canada, we're the gateway to the South. If you exactly said it right, if you're accessing healthcare here, you might get lost. You might not make your flight home. So it's a huge part of the Edmonton complexity is that we serve everyone from our northern communities, and they get lost in our system.
Monsieur Villeneuve, pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Villeneuve for 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start. Well, of course, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us. The fact that you are here and that means you're contributing to our work significantly, so thank you. Mr. Edstrom, I was the mayor of Bromont for 8 years. It's a small city of about 12,000 citizens. Now, over the years, of course, we have seen homelessness morph, as did our colleague in her region, Ms. Larouche. Now, Bromont, a small city of 12,000 people, it's not very big, but we have seen people experiencing homelessness. Now, would you say that there has been an evolution in terms of the profile of people experiencing homelessness over the years? And if yes, what explains that change? There have been some changes. One of the main causes is evictions. People end up on the street. And recently there was a survey, and in Bromont, we had a very high percentage of visible homelessness. Maybe there was hidden homelessness before. So people maybe no longer are living on the couch of a friend or someone they know, or they've had some kind of other challenge. That's sometimes how they end up experiencing homelessness. But of course, we need to catch these people at one point or another. We need many layers to our system. And of course, they need sufficient income, healthcare, nutrition. Those are all components of a solution. Maybe over the years, conditions have worsened at all of these levels. So maybe as a result, it takes less for some people to experience homelessness. And we have had quantitative statistics. The qualitative work will be done in the fall, and hopefully that will shed more light on the situation. We have data from 2022, but we know that the situation has changed since then again. So it's been a gradual process, and people at the end of certain processes arrive at a point of rupture and end up in the street. It's, of course, never easy, and Fadi Daguerre said this, who is the chief of police of the Montreal Police Service. He used to be in Longueuil. He had that experience of a couple days of spending his days and nights with people experiencing homelessness. Now, even after such a brief period, you're exhausted physically and mentally. It's no longer possible to remain in good health. And it's very easy for people to be traumatized by even short experiences. So the profile has changed, and we will have more details to explain that more. But some people might be closer to experiencing homelessness. Thank you. We have about a minute and a half. I'll have another question for you. Now, you spoke about a general approach. So in about a minute or so, could you maybe elaborate what you mean by that? And if you had one wish, a magic wand, what would be your wish? Well, if we find a real magic wand, I will let you know. But in the meantime, what would your wish be? Well, I would wish for a transpartisan approach, be it on this side, on the Liberal side, or I have also had support and conversations with and from Conservative MPs. So we need a collective approach that would allow organizations to realize their missions. We introduce criteria, and we make things too rigid sometimes, but maybe the right thing, trying to find a miracle solution that would work everywhere across the country. It's been years that we've been looking for that solution. We have tried many things. Many things turned out not to work. And the consensus is that we need flexibility. So stop making different envelopes, different buckets of money too rigid, so that we are more flexible in spending these sums. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Villeneuve. Very good questions. Ms. Larouche for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Soroka, thank you for being with us, for sharing your point of view with us. It's very interesting, but I will turn to Mr. Edstrom in this round as well. Now, of course, almost everyone is one episode away from ending up on the street. I did some voluntary work, and we were working with people. Some of them were experiencing homelessness. One individual used to be a lawyer, and as a result of an incident in their personal life, they ended up experiencing homelessness. So we should never forget that. Now, not a week goes by without seeing an article on homelessness. In the Journal de Montréal, for instance, there was one about an increasing number of rent evictions, leading people to the street, and some of them are not able to find housing. And there is also women experiencing hidden homelessness, victims of violence, for instance, sometimes can end up in that situation. So when you see such articles, for instance, Saguenay has a model in homelessness management, that also shows us that it's a problem across the entire region. Well, so when you look beyond the anecdote, of course, there are models and ways of doing things across the country, different approaches, but all of this vision has to do with the fact that homelessness should not be tolerated. We need to make sure that individuals have incomes, and if we work on the first layer, it's about improving the conditions across the society. Because homelessness is like a vortex. You get caught and then you spiral down. But we need to prevent people from falling into the vortex, because the deeper they are in the vortex, the more energy it takes to extract them out of that. That's the general guiding principle in terms of our interventions. Now, of course, there are levers at the provincial level. There is money at the provincial level. So we need to use that, and it takes real collaboration between the federal level, municipal level, and provincial level to make sure that we're as efficient as possible. Thank you, Ms. Lerush.
For 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Soroka, across Canada, homelessness is often accompanied with other issues like drug addiction. The opioid crisis is affecting everyone. Edmonton has seen hundreds of deaths among the homeless population, and opioid-related fatalities remain high. In your experience at Jasper Place, what percentage of your clients need structural addiction treatment or recovery support before or concurrent with housing?
None of them need it before housing. Housing is the foundational aspect that empowers and acts as the conduit to recovery. So the example I will give you is I have many clients who go into detox programs, but once they finish medical grade detox, they have nowhere safe to go. How do you remain safe and sober in an environment that made you start using substances in the first place? So we do have to start with housing, because if someone leaves detox, they need a safe, sober place to stay. Housing is always the first step and the conduit to all of the other recovery-based solutions that we need.
I'm a big proponent of the Alberta recovery model, and I believe in recovery and not enabling. So my question is more around the housing first model. Without accountability or treatment for addictions, it led to higher rates of relapse and injury. So it's exactly what you're saying. And I'm wondering if there needs to be a different form of transitional housing that occurs after detox before we go into more of a temporary. Would you agree with that statement?
I would agree that we need spaces for people to exist in while they navigate the scheme of life. So I would agree that, yes, I run a program called Recovery and Transition that holds people while they wait for that long-term recovery bed to become available. Because even though we're very recovery focused currently in Alberta, it can still be upwards of 10 weeks to actually access that long-term recovery program that can help someone have a new path for life. So you are right. We do need those transitional spaces for people to exist and be safe, remain sober, and incorporate tools that provide them strengths to not return back to use. And that even is just as simple as someone to build a relationship with and get to know your name and your story.
And I really like the model of, small groups of people like Oxford House or Eighth Pillar. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about Healing House because I sit on health, and the fact that you have medical beds is something that I feel that every homeless shelter needs to incorporate in their model. And it does save taxpayer money. But I was shocked to hear that you're only receiving $140 a day for someone that is discharged. Now, how do you get those people? Are you getting them from the Navigation Support Center, or are you getting them directly from a doctor?
They come directly from the 5 emergency departments in Edmonton. That's the only referral pathway is a social worker in the emergency department.
Okay. Are there any federal regulation barriers currently preventing your work or the work of other organizations like yours? And how could removing red tape on housing, construction, and treatment beds accelerate progress? So that's that magic wand.
Yes, truly finding organizations that work on the main level, connecting with people and funding them directly to those community-based solutions is the number one approach that will enable and be a conduit to things moving faster. So that will be my answer.
Okay. The Auditor General and Parliamentary Budget Officer have noted weak accountability and poor outcomes under Reaching Homes despite hundreds of millions in new funding. Are there any accountability reforms that would strengthen integrity in public spending?
Yes, I would agree with some of the other presenters today that if we could have shared definitions across Canada, that would increase accountability to actual proven outcomes. Currently, none of the programs I operate fully align with the true philosophies of the programs we're saying we're operating, like Housing First. So it's tough.
Well, I'd like to thank you all, the witnesses, for joining us today. And on my summer tour, I'm going to call and see if you have time to welcome me and take me for a tour. I'd like to learn a lot more. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Really good testimony given during this hour. We'll conclude with Ms. Harrison for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, and good morning to all the witnesses for being here and your incredibly thoughtful testimony that you've given so far. The riding I represent is Peterborough, and my husband is actually a paramedic. And to see how his job has so drastically changed from when he started to now. And during the election, I'd asked him, what is the most challenging thing about your job when you're responding to calls to the people who are unhoused in the riding? Because they get to know them. They know their story, because it's a frequent situation where they're picking up the same person over and over and over again. He said the hardest thing is knowing there's nothing else I can do except for drop them off at the emergency department. And then more often than not, they don't even go in, they just walk away. So to Mrs. Ballou, I would love to know, how is your municipality coordinating with housing providers, shelters, and health services and Indigenous partners to create a more integrated homelessness response system?
Yeah, I think that's one area where we've seen the most progress despite limited resources and increasing rates of homelessness and rates with which we can't keep up in terms of the resources we're receiving. So as I was saying, one of the things that we have managed to do very successfully has been the coordination between community partners. Whether you want to consider it a legacy of the COVID pandemic or crisis response and just necessity, we've been coordinating much better and trying to break down the silos between community partners. So we do have, we're seeing collaboration between services, mobile crisis response teams, where you've got partnership between our Timmins Police Service and as well as the Timmins District Hospital. We have our Indigenous-led outreach services that work in partnership with our Social Service Administration Board's Housing Service team. And so we have the Firekeeper Patrol, which is a great example of, peer-led support and navigation support. But at this time, I would say, again, this is where there is a gap. It's allowing, so that, this is very much community-led work that's being done. And quite honestly, we all came together to a table to collaborate around an application for a Heart Hub here in Ontario, which was the Homelessness and Addiction Recovery Treatment Hubs model that the province has decided to put all their eggs into that basket. And so, we were forced to get together, to work together. Unfortunately, we weren't recipients of one of the Heart Hub funding announcements here in Timmins, but we haven't left the table. So we're staying at the table together and we keep working towards a long-lasting solution.
Thank you for that. In Peterborough, we were very, very lucky. We are the recipient of a Heart Hub, and it's an incredible model, and the success of it is going to be incredible, and we feel so very fortunate to be recipients of that. Several, I'm not exactly sure, I think all of you have mentioned the Reaching Homes program, so I'd love to know more of what you'd like to see moving forward in the next iteration of that program, so to any of the witnesses.
If I may, since I still have my microphone on, I agree with all of with the other two witnesses that spoke today in their testimony, and so FCM supports the maintenance of Reaching Home. It's essential that we maintain Reaching Home, but that we continue to enhance it. At the very least, we need to index it to inflation, but especially that flexibility that Mr. Edstrom spoke so well to, as well as the predictability. We need longer term agreements. I know the question was asked whether or not we're actually delivering positive outcomes. I think that as long as governments continue to expect municipalities and service providers to keep delivering outcomes within election cycles, we're never going to deliver the outcomes that we're actually looking for. We need 10-year agreements, long-term agreements. We're in this for the long term. We're in this as long as there's homelessness. And so we need to have that predictability in terms of the funding that's coming so we can make sound operational decisions.
Mr. Edstrom, would you like to speak to the Reaching Home program and just elaborate further on what you'd like to see?
I think we're in for the long term, baby. Yep, I heard that. We did the same thing for maybe 40 plus years, and we need to address it on a longer term to be able to change it. We need not to despair and keep fighting. That's the problem with the encampment and stuff like that. You don't have to think that they have to be there or that they will still be there in 10 or 20 years. But yeah, we said long-term flexibility, put a little more money. We need at least indexation, because from every year when it's not indexed, we're actually cutting corners and having to make a hard decision on it. And about people who has addiction problem and relapsing, relapse is part of the process, so trust the process. That I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. Merci, Madame Boileau.
Thank you, Ms. Boileau.
Madame Soroka.
And Ms. Soroka. Mr. Edstrom.
The committee will suspend while we transition to the next hour. Suspend. Disabilities. Welcome, Dr. Wiseman or Witzman? Witzman. Welcome. You've been in the committee before. And from Rental Housing Canada, Tony Irwin, President and Chief Executive Officer. Each of you have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement. We'll begin with Dr. Witzman.
Thank you, Chair.
Weitzman. Did I get it wrong? Weitzman.
It's a hard I. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
Not that we're, you know.
Bon matin. Je n'ai pas une baguette magie, mais
Good morning. I don't have a magic wand, but maybe I could talk about 3 things that would help with affordable housing.
I'm going to start with 3, if not magic wands, things that might matter. First, the next national housing strategy should create targets for affordable market and non-market housing completions, not starts. That builds on some of the testimony you heard last hour. The next national housing strategy should adopt 1 definition of affordable housing for all its programs, and that should be based on area median household income bands. So middle-income people need different interventions than low-income people. And the federal government should adopt programs to achieve targets of 200,000 new or acquired affordable non-market homes being developed per year, with half of those to be deeply affordable for very low to low-income households, towards an eventual goal of 20% of all housing stock being non-market. So I have written a book called Home Truths, Fixing Canada's Housing Crisis, and I've done some recent work for the Federal Housing Advocate on a rights-based approach to housing needs. I want to start off with the title of this particular hearing. We should be measuring housing completions, not starts, because people can't live on a construction site, and there are too many stalled projects in Canada, and that's something my colleague would definitely agree with, I think. Despite greater federal engagement in housing policy since the 2017 National Housing Strategy, construction trends simply do not match the urgency of the moment. The CMHC stopped tracking completions from 2023 to 25, but there were fewer housing starts in 2025 than there were in 2022, and there were fewer housing completions in 2022 than there were 50 years earlier in 1972, when Canada had half the population it does today, and families were larger. The National Housing Strategy provided over $110 billion in financial support, mostly for market developers, over the last 8 years, but less than 10% of their housing completion targets have been met. And only 3% of the only 18,000 rental homes completed under the $55 billion apartment construction loan program since 2017 have been affordable to low-income households most likely to be in housing need, and these were mostly studio apartments unsuitable to couples and families. What's even worse than poor housing completions are worsening housing outcomes, and I think you heard that in the last hour. By any measure, middle-income ownership affordability, low-income tenant affordability, homelessness, Canada is in the midst of a housing crisis. Canada's median multiple for home ownership is now almost 2 times the affordable cost, 3 times in Toronto, 4 times in Vancouver. And trying to bring house prices down to a half or a quarter of what they are in a short period of time, like a decade, is a recipe for economic disaster, and certainly won't lead to more than doubling housing supply as the CMHC recommends. For instance, in Toronto, where condo prices have fallen 18% since 2022 and sales volumes have dropped 95% from 2021, there were no new condo projects registered in the first quarter of 2026. The National Housing Strategy's 2 headline targets were to reduce core housing need by 530,000 households and to reduce chronic homelessness by 50%. But the Parliamentary Budget Office projects that housing need will have increased from 1.7 million households in 2016 to 2.6 million households in the 2026 census. And chronic homelessness doubled from 2018 to 2022. There is only one way to address those basic needs: invest in non-market and limited dividend affordable housing. So there's three things that the federal government needs to do. Focus finance on the needs of most Canadians. The federal government should limit its low-interest financing to projects that are 100% affordable to the majority of Canadians. Very low to median income households are 60% of households and 100% of those in unaffordable housing. That means rents of no more than $2,500 per month nationally, and ownership homes that cost no more than $254,000. Less in Gander, where incomes are lower, more in Victoria, where incomes are higher.
Wrap shortly.
I will. I will end with one line. Let's build on what works and stop financing what doesn't work. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Weitzman. Good. Mr. Irwin, for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee, for the opportunity to be here with you today. My name is Tony Irwin. I'm President and CEO of Rental Housing Canada. I was pleased to speak with this committee in April, with Dr. Weitzman, in fact, on Bill C-20, where we've done this before on television in this committee. We could take this on the road. I'm not sure who would want to buy tickets, but we'll try to sell some. And I do appreciate the opportunity to return today. Rental Housing Canada members build, own, and manage homes where millions of Canadians build their lives, raise families, work, study, and contribute to their communities. A strong housing system is one where Canadians can access the right home for their needs at different stages of life. Students, newcomers, middle-income workers, seniors, and people saving for a first home all rely on rental housing. And for many Canadians, renting is not a temporary gap in the system. It is the housing that best fits their needs. Purpose-built rental is closely connected to the rest of the housing system. When rental supply is limited, pressure builds across the market. Affordability becomes more difficult for renters. Mobility becomes harder for families, and non-market housing faces additional pressure when it should be focused on those with the deepest need. That is why purpose-built rental housing must remain a core part of the federal housing agenda. Over the last several decades, purpose-built rental housing has not always had the policy and investment conditions needed to grow at the scale that Canada requires. In the 1970s and 1980s, Canada built a significant amount of purpose-built rental housing. Since then, changing economics, higher costs, taxes, municipal fees, financing conditions, and approval timelines have made many new rental projects much harder to deliver. It's well documented that Canada has been experiencing a slowdown in home construction in many parts of the country. People often tell me these days that rental housing is the bright light and refer to project starts to make that point. For example, in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, purpose-built rental starts reached nearly 10,000 units in 2025, a 42% increase over 2024 and the highest annual total since the 1970s. However, this data does not necessarily reflect what my members are experiencing on the ground. That is why others have testified before this committee that housing starts should be tied to the physical start of construction on site. Waiting until a project is above grade can miss months or even more than a year of real construction activity, particularly on larger rental projects with significant foundation or underground work. We cannot make decisions on housing based on data points and assumptions that do not fully reflect what is happening in real time. For rental providers, lenders, and investors, every project depends on the same basic question. Can this building be financed, built, and operated over the long term? That is why project viability has to remain at the center of federal housing policy. Rental Housing Canada supports federal government policy action, including the acceleration of over $7 billion in the CMHC Apartment Construction Loan Program to support up to 16,500 new rental homes. Mortgage insurance reforms to unlock financing for 3 to 8 unit housing, including smaller scale rental. The Canada-Ontario Municipal Development Charge Reduction Program. GST relief for new rental housing, and the launch of Build Canada Homes. These are positive, practical, supply-focused measures. We've heard directly from our members that tools like MLI Select and ACLP have significantly helped rental projects move forward by improving access to financing and strengthening project economics. These tools matter because of the important role they play in determining whether a rental project proceeds or not. At the same time, as the federal government moves forward with Build Canada Homes, it will be important to maintain clear roles across the housing system. Build Canada Homes can make an important contribution to non-market and community housing, while CMHC should remain a key financing partner for private market purpose-built rental housing. Mr. Chair, the federal government has taken important steps. My message today is that the policy direction is encouraging and that practical refinements can help turn that momentum into more homes. The test for federal housing policy should be this: does it help good projects become real homes? And does it support the full range of housing Canadians need? We should all want a housing system where public, nonprofit, and private partners are each able to do what they do best. Canada needs all forms of housing delivered faster, with better coordination, and with policies that make projects viable. Rental Housing Canada is ready to continue working constructively with governments, CMHC, municipalities, and all housing partners across the country to help turn policy momentum into homes Canadians can live in. Thank you.
6-minute round of questioning with Ms. Falk.
Thank you very much, Chair, and it's nice to see you both here again. Ironic, it's at the same time on the same panel. That's wonderful. Ms. Weitzman, I'd like to start with you, if possible. And you did allude to this in your opening remarks. In your brief, you stated that housing completions are a more meaningful measure than housing starts, noting that people can't live in a construction site. And that many projects are stalled. I'm just wondering if you could explain further why you believe housing starts are a problematic indicator of housing supply and housing outcomes.
I would say that housing starts, with the provisos that Tony just said, are useful. I think the abandonment of measuring housing completions was a poor decision, which fortunately has been changed by the CMHC. I think it's important to measure the difference, like the length of time between housing starts and housing completions. But there are quite a few stalled projects across Canada, hundreds of thousands.
Has CMHC ever stated why they stopped measuring completions?
They were trying, I believe they were trying to cut costs, and it was a poor decision of where to cut costs.
Yeah, data is usually a good indicator of if things are on track or if off track, right? So I would agree that it's important to collect that information. Just to follow up, in your view, what are the main reasons that housing projects are delayed or fail to reach completion?
Well, as my colleague has said, whether you're a non-market or a market developer, you're influenced by construction costs, which have been affected by the trade war going on with the U.S., by labor costs, by land costs. Well, not once the construction has started, so I'm going to walk that one back. And by ever-increasing development charges. And let me be clear that development charges need a solution. The solution isn't just to say to municipalities, sort it out, because they have less than 10% of the tax dollar. Some things are going to need to be uploaded to provinces and the federal government, but putting the onus on newcomers or people interested in a new apartment or a new owned home is a really, really regressive form of taxation.
How about you, Mr. Irwin?
In terms of why projects are stalled? Yeah, I mean, Dr. Weitzman, I agree with much, if not all, of what she said in that regard. I mean, when I speak to members, all of those same challenges, around construction costs that have been quite volatile, around government fees and charges. There's been lots of discussion about that. I've talked to some of you about that outside of committee. The number of variables and when we go back a few years, projects that got started and then economic conditions changed from the time, or they were well through the development pipeline and perhaps did break ground, but then economic conditions, interest rates, and some of these things we're talking about then changed. And so what that does impact how a project moves forward when in real time you've started a large project that's taken you several years to get to, and you've spent millions of dollars getting to that point, and then economic conditions change. We can't necessarily predict those things, but they do impact whether a project can go forward. So that's certainly what has been the case over the last few years and continues to be the case.
Yeah, well, it seems crazy that you could be planning, getting everything lined up. It's taking several years, and you're not breaking ground yet. Like, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy.
Well, there are a number of reasons when you say that haven't broken ground yet. In some cases, in terms of stalled projects, they have broken ground and are stalled, like they have started, and they wouldn't be considered a start yet, based on, or just to sort of in speaking about what we've been talking about in our remarks. By the definition, it wouldn't be considered a start yet. But excavation permit's been received, grounds have been broken, and then things do change that impact how a project can move forward. It's not that it won't necessarily be completed, but it might take much longer because now the developer has to make some adjustments and figure out how they can adapt to changing conditions. As for ones that haven't started, that's a whole other conversation entirely in terms of how long it takes to get through the process, to get the necessary approvals, to get the permits, and as that's happening, as we've been talking about, the number of conditions that can change that impact whether a project can in fact go forward that are different now perhaps than maybe 5 years ago when the project was first envisioned. That's why we advocate for faster approval times. We need to cut red tape. We need to be able to sort of get through some of these pre-development processes more quickly to hopefully be able to capitalize on better conditions.
And even just tax, right? You've got these different levels of government that all need to, they need to have some type of revenue, right? So whether that's at the federal, provincial, municipal level, you have different governments that are saying, well, that's not my jurisdiction, that's your jurisdiction, which then maybe to your comment about offloading onto the municipality, and the municipality being the one in charge, or irresponsible, I guess, in that avenue. And then you have the taxpayer who is being taxed on taxed on taxed on tax. They're taxed literally to death. And literally after death, they're still being taxed, right? So then you have these projects to try to build, or to even just with investment for jobs, that type of thing, that isn't happening because of the amount of taxation, regulation, and red tape. And they all touch one another and affect one
I just want to give a non-market perspective on that, sorry.
We're well over time.
Sorry.
You can respond to that later. Monsieur Villeneuve, pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Weitzman. I would like to give you a bit of an opportunity to keep expanding maybe. Now, when you talk about housing starts, without taking completions into account, what should decision makers, or what are decision makers or lawmakers missing?
Market developers is because they're operating on a much smaller margin and with less equity. And I'm sorry, I'm not answering in French, Monsieur Villeneuve, but I use a lot of jargon, and it's easier for me to talk jargon in English. In any case, the federal government is often the last funder to come on board. You have to wait for municipal approvals. You have to wait for other forms of funding. I don't know of a nonprofit project that's had less than 4 funders. And the federal government, first through the CMHC, now through Build Canada Homes, appears to be the last people to assume risk. And in some ways, the federal government, we heard in the last session about the importance of continuity of federal funding for programs like Reaching Home. The lack of continuity has been an issue as the fact that the federal government are the last folks in instead of the first folks in. So there's so many cases of developers who have put in $1 million in pre-development costs, and that's true whether you're a non-market or a market developer, and who then are left hanging because the agreement that they'd worked out with the federal government doesn't reflect the current realities of building. So it's really important to absolutely speed up the process, but also for the federal government to be the folks who assume the most risk. That's the only way that private equity is going to be unlocked, certainly when it comes to non-market housing. I suspect for market housing as well.
Merci, Madame Wiseman. Alors, selon vous, dans quelle mesure une collaboration étroite?
Thank you. So, to what extent a close collaboration between the federal government, provinces, and territories, as well as the municipalities, is essential to resolve this issue, and who is the best place to take care of the different components of the challenge that's before us?
Really important not only to have one straightforward definition of affordability, because quite often, because of the cobbling together of different programs, you end up having to do some very complex math indeed in order to reconcile different definitions of affordability. But it's really important to have targets and have overall goals, like we will end homelessness by X date, we will end low-income renter housing need by X date, we will ensure that there's an affordable homes for all Canadians by X date. The only level of government that can do that is the federal government. Then there's a question of how much leeway should be given to provincial and territorial governments and to municipal governments. I would agree with a lot of what was spoken in the last hour about innovation and about differences between rural and urban, but the outcomes need to be clear and the targets need to be clear, and that should be the basis of any agreement between the federal government and provincial territorial governments or city and regional governments. We want to see homelessness go down by 20% over the next 5 years. You sort it out, you track it every year, you get back to us. So I'm a great believer of flexibility in terms of program delivery, but of absolute clarity, which frankly has been missing from the federal government about what's meant by affordable housing and what would be necessary to create the kind of Canada that we all want in terms of year-on-year reduction of homelessness, year-on-year reduction of housing stress.
Merci beaucoup. Et je terminerai avec...
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask you a question, Mr. Irwin. Do you think that Build Canada Homes will have a positive impact in housing starts in Canada and in terms of increasing non-market housing?
Absolutely, Build Canada Homes will have an impact. I mean, I think when we talk about, ensuring that all Canadians have homes that meet their needs and budgets, there's no question that affordability is an issue for many Canadians. We all know about that. We all talk about it in this place every day and in all of our communities. And that's obviously housing is a big part of the conversation. So the goal, as I believe Build Canada Homes has set out, in order to provide support through government land, through preferred financing, to be able to unlock affordable homes. I think that is a very it's a goal that I certainly support, and we need it. We do need more housing that is more affordable. Market housing is not affordable for all. There are ways we can make market housing more affordable, but I think Build Canada Homes, I think its mission to use tools that it's been provided to be able to unlock more affordable homes, I think is very important, and one that we should all be, I think, supporting as best we can.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Irwin. Merci, Madame Wiseman.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Villeneuve. Ms. LaRouche, for 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Irwin, Ms. Weitzman, for being with us today. we're talking about something, of course, that's essential to every individual. Housing is an essential need. Having a roof over one's head and being adequately and appropriately housed. Now, you refer to many numbers. So, Ms. Weitzman, you spoke about a target of 20% of non-market housing. Now, in media outlets, we are seeing a record number of renovictions. People end up on the streets, especially senior citizens who are not able to absorb the increased cost of future rent with their fixed income. Now, I would like to come back to this point. Many organizations are asking for this non-market housing. Now, if you were to give us a summary of the main actions that are required to meet this 20% objective, what would those be? Because they are very central to this discussion.
Madame Laroche.
Thank you, Ms. Laroche.
To learn from countries that have better outcomes in Canada. And one country that I'm thinking of in that regard is France. In the year 2000, which was 26 years ago, the government of France created a target for all municipalities of 20% non-market housing. And of course, it created the finance instruments for both new build renovations, actually three things, new build renovations and acquisitions. The amount of non-market housing in France has since more than doubled. It was 9% and now it's above 18%. In Paris, it's close to 25%, and of course Paris is the most expensive city in France, partly because Paris took on a voluntary target of 30%. Those targets haven't changed as governments have changed in France. The financing methods haven't changed as governments have changed in France, and that would, to me, would be an example of clear direction. In terms of outcomes, 15% of low-income renters are still in unaffordable housing, which is too much. It's over 75% in Canada. So that shows you the difference that clear targets, certainly a clear definition of affordability, and programs make at the national level.
It's also interesting to look at international examples. Mr. Irvin, Ms. Weitzman spoke about the French example. Have you had the opportunity of maybe looking into other international examples in terms of non-market housing or how they're dealing with the commodification of housing? Have you had the opportunity?
Thank you for the question. Admittedly, I'm not as knowledgeable on that as Dr. Weitzman. I am much more, I guess my time is spent much more on issues at home than abroad. I do have some, do follow it some, but admittedly, I'm not as knowledgeable as Dr. Weitzman on that topic.
Well, Mr. Irvin, you spoke about things that work, so the $7 billion to CMHC, loan guarantees, the need to invest more in Build Canada homes. Now, in terms of what works, what can we further improve? Because you gave us many examples, so I'd like to give you the opportunity of maybe elaborating a bit more on what works and how it can be improved.
In terms of some of the current sort of programs and policies that we're speaking about. So, I mean, I think like all of these things, when we see government programs, we have to, first of all, see them over the finish line, see all the different details of them and see them actually working. I see them in practice. And so I think some of the things we're talking about, like, for example, the development charge, recent development charge announcement between the federal government and the province of Ontario. I know other announcements have been made with the government of Quebec, for example, just recently as well. Not a bit different, obviously, but using the same funding envelope for that. We need to actually see that actually in practice and now to understand how effective it will be. In Ontario, there's municipalities have to opt into the program. They've got a very tight timeline to do that. We certainly hope municipalities will to be able to actually, and then I think it's fair to say that once some of these programs are actually in place, really really, it's up to, in that case, municipalities, but also it's up to those who build rental housing. We now need to step up, right? We now need to step up and actually sort of go forward and hopefully, sort of hold up our end of this, I think, in these scenarios, which is actually, find viable projects, work with our different partners, and get shovels in the ground. But I think with a lot of these programs, we need to actually see them actually implemented to know how effective they will be. So I think on some of the most recent things I talked about, we still need the benefit of time to understand how effective they will be. I am hopeful. Dr. Weitzman talked about development charges, growth needing to pay for growth. I agree with that, but I think there's an acknowledgement amongst many of us that the formula, the manner in which that's been working has not been working, or the manner in which that's been structured has not been working for some time. So coming up with different creative ways to ensure that infrastructure is built and paid for without unduly creating undue hardships on municipal governments who perhaps can't weather that so easily. We need to figure out ways to do that work for everyone, that actually help us get the housing built that Canadians need, that does meet different budgets, that can be affordable for more perhaps than it is today. So.
Merci, Madame Larouche. Madame Goodrich, pour 5
Ms. Goodrich for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
A year ago, the Liberal Prime Minister, said that we were going to build at unimaginable speeds. Really quickly, Dr. Weitzman, has that been the reality in what you've seen in your research for the last year? Oh, can you repeat that? Sorry, you weren't.
Sorry, clearly that's not happening. I think that there's still a great deal of uncertainty around housing policy. There's been a great deal of energy spent building up Build Canada homes. Like Mr. Irwin, I have generally positive support for the idea of Build Canada homes. It needs to be backed up with better finance mechanisms, a much clearer idea of how much non-market / perpetually affordable housing should be built, I would say, with free government land and in many cases deferral of development charges, for instance. The aim should be 100% affordable for low to median income, which is a majority of Canadians. So I think that there's been a certain amount of focus on establishment. I would like to see and deals made, which is great. It's a big shift for a lot of developers. I think that it needs to settle down, become a lot more certain, and a lot more clearly linked to those very noble outcomes of more housing in order to work better.
Well, and I know, like, one of my biggest concerns and the biggest concern of a lot of Conservatives has been that they're just building more bureaucracy. They're building another layer onto a layer. No one's been able to explain from the Liberal side what Build Canada Homes is going to do that CMHC and Canada Lands Corporation couldn't have already done. And so this is one of those pieces or why they couldn't have just created some change. And all I've seen from my lens is just further delays, because now people don't know where to go to apply for the next big project for affordable housing. They don't know who to talk to, what the process actually looks like, which means further delays in actually getting people into those houses. I'm from Fort McMurray. I've seen booms my entire life. I've seen boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. I thought that was normal. Turns out it's not for most people across Canada. And I've seen a community that's been able to rise to the occasion and just get things built. It really bothers me that this is a government that's promised to get things built, and yet we've seen effectively no completions. Lots of announcements and re-announcements. Mr. Irwin, what are you seeing in the rental space? Are you seeing completions come through because of Build Canada Homes?
So no, and I guess I would say again, Build Canada Homes is obviously quite new. We're all trying to understand how it's going to work, navigate the investment criteria, the portal. We have members who are engaging with Build Canada Homes, who are talking to them, talking to other nonprofits to see if they can in fact move projects forward. So in that sense, I know there's activity, but to your question or point, are we seeing starts yet? No, we're not. But I mean,
So we're not seeing starts, we're not seeing completions.
well, because through that program, no, we're not seeing that. But I think it would be not realistic to assume that we would be at this point.
Okay, but if they had simply put that power into CMHC that already existed, could you have reasonably seen starts happen in the last year? Because we've seen effectively nothing for the last year, despite promises of moving at unimaginable speeds. But we assumed it meant fast, not unimaginably slow.
Well, I think when I speak to, and again, recognizing different regions have different experiences, but when I speak to members who are, trying to build rental apartments in places like Toronto and Vancouver, they tell me that irrespective of what agency we're talking about, or that, set that aside, when I say to them, any projects you're actually able to get into the ground now, what is it needed to, what have you needed to make that happen? So, things like, not paying GST, things like having ACLP financing, and things like having full development charge waivers.
So on the GST piece,
yep.
So far the government decided that they would do that for Ontario, but not for anywhere else. Do you think that removing the GST on new homes built would be a good idea to help reduce costs?
For new rental housing, we have it for more than just Ontario. That was announced by the Trudeau government a few years ago. So I believe that exists in more than just Ontario for rental housing.
Okay, for rental housing.
And that's my area.
Okay.
Goodrich, Ms. Fancy for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and through you, Chair, thank you, Mr. Irwin and Ms. Weidsman. Again, it kind of feels like we're full circle in some ways. I remember having some questions for you that I never got to last time, and I want to pick up some of that as well as some of Start. So today, I'm going to start with Ms. Weidsman in terms of, you talked a lot about the missing middle within your book, Home Truths. So I'd like to talk about the missing middle today in terms of a couple of population demographics. The first one that I'd like to look at is in terms of how much housing conversation, a lot of our housing conversation here is focused on more urban areas, as you know, a steadfast rural advocate. So I'd like to ask about, how does the missing middle challenge differ in rural and small towns and smaller communities? And what do you feel the federal policies could do to help address some of these unique needs? Because I know through Build Canada Homes, we've had some smaller communities that were a little bit resistant in terms of a carve out or how much attention they were going to get. And I'm looking at, are there some policies that we can be using to help support some of our smaller and rural communities?
Before we respond, is that the opening of the house or bells ring? Bells ring. Okay, I need unanimous consent to continue. Is it, what is it, a 15 or 30-minute bell? What is it? Oh, it's a 30. What's the will of the committee? Continue? Okay, we will then continue. Members, get my attention till at least, oh, that's right, we're in West Block. We're in West Levac, so how about agreeing to continue for 20 minutes, 20 minutes, or leave 10 minutes? We'll go. Okay, good. Thank you, committee members.
I'll try to make it quick, Ms. Fancy. So it's really important to think about portfolios that might be regional portfolios. I'm going to give a very concrete example. Mission Unité in Quebec, where 11 100-unit seniors buildings using a replicable design have been built in 11 different small communities. So that's the kind of scaling up that we need across Canada. And there's absolutely no reason that St. Thomas in Ontario is likely to become the first small city in Canada since Medicine Hat to declare functional zero homelessness. So you can do a lot in small communities. It takes a portfolio approach, I would argue, and it takes an understanding of rural realities, which might include greater need for basic water and sanitation infrastructure, but that's what housing and infrastructure, I would argue, is for.
That's wonderful. I know in my community, one of my communities in Bridgewater, some of our municipalities in the town are working together on larger infrastructure projects so that they can help scale both inside and around some of our small towns. My other question is regarding ways that we can prevent gender-based violence through housing. And I'm wondering, what connections do you see between housing affordability, homelessness, and gender-based violence, particularly for women and seniors who could be fleeing abusive situations?
Thank you, Ms. Fancy. That's an issue that's been very close to my heart for over 30 years. If you're in an unsafe situation, whether it's a spouse who's violent or a landlord who's abusive, it's really important to be able to get into a safe space. But we often think of emergency shelters and transitional housing. It may require either being able to stay in the home or being able to find a new home that's less expensive for you and possibly your children. So it's really important to not leave out the intersectional analysis that's been in the National Housing Strategy. It's also really important when we're talking about homelessness to include people who are couch surfing, because women are much more likely to be in an informal homelessness situation rather than presenting to certainly municipal emergency shelters. And those are things that a good strategy would be recognizing in its outcomes and would be incorporating in the way that it designs programs. So it's a really important point. And again, I'll keep it short.
No, thank you so much. And I'd love to talk more because that's also been very near and dear to my heart for many years. So in conclusion then, in regarding that middle income Canadians, I'm wondering in terms of different recommendations of policy changes that would make the biggest difference for middle income Canadians. And we're talking about affordability measures with housing starts.
I'm going to take the liberty of mentioning something that was in my last page that got cut off. I want to talk about limited dividend companies, which were a big part of what, like when Canada was building 10 times as much non-market housing as it is now. Those were private companies incentivized to construct, hold, and manage rental homes affordable to income-tested, low, moderate, middle-income households with no more than a 5% return rate per year. And again, I can tell you how it works in Austria and the Netherlands as part of, I would argue, the non-market sector. And it's something that it still exists in the NHA, the concept of a limited dividend company, and it can be explored. And again, it's something that I can't get into in full detail right now while bells are ringing.
If she could provide that to us, that would be very wholesome within the report. Thank you, Ms. Wiseman.
Fancy. Madame Larouche, pour 2 minutes.
Ms. Larouche for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses once again for being with us in this important study. Mr. Weitzman, you spoke about something that's quite important. There are regional disparities and the realities in Quebec. Of course, it's a particular situation. We have the SHQ, and then, of course, we have the new Build Canada Homes, but SHQ will have the last word because they know the realities on the ground. So what is needed is collaboration with Quebec. Now, there are some projects in my region of Shefford. It's of different models. There is an organization, for instance, that collaborates with the local governments for social and community housing. So in Quebec, the question of affordability, and you spoke to it, a lot of other witnesses have also. It's very hard not to have a clear definition, because when you say affordability, you can fit anything and everything under it. So what's then the importance of coming to terms with a common definition of social and community housing so that Quebecers and Canadians don't spend more than 30% of their incomes on housing? That would be important.
Well, Madame Larouche, as you may remember, I've often said some very good things about Quebec programs. However, the recent changes to those programs had more to do, I would argue, than provincial politics and federal politics. Having said that, I think that it is really important to have a clear definition, which is different right now in Quebec than to the rest of Canada, of what affordability means for different income groups, and also to have a very clear view of the value of various non-market providers, public housing, co-op housing, non-market housing, and I'd argue limited dividend housing. Having said that, I'll go back to something I said earlier, which is that I think the federal government should set goals and definitions, but then let provinces do what they do best. And Quebec has been doing, it has had continuity, it's had a clear financing stream, it's had the wonderful partnership with Desjardins. You know, there's a lot of things that the rest of Canada should learn from Quebec, and by no means Canada should say, this is the one way to do it. Alberta has had incredibly good homelessness prevention programs has had good prevention programs. BC has had a wonderful acquisition program. Let provinces do what they know how to do.
And I have Mr. McKenzie. Mr. McKenzie, for 5 minutes. We'll get the last 2 rounds in.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Dr. Weitzman, I'm coming your direction. I've looked at now 3 programs. Originally, the Rental Construction Finance Initiative became the Apartment Construction Loan Program, 2017, budget of $55 billion. The National Housing Co-Investment Fund became the Affordable Housing Fund, $15 billion in May of 2018. The Rapid Housing Initiative, $4 billion budget, October 2020. I add that up to $74 billion and just over 59,000 housing units created. That's an average of $1,250,000 expended by the federal government, or at least budgeted, per unit. And now we're moving into Build Canada Homes with an extremely aggressive target of 500,000 housing units a year with a $13 billion budget. We're not really getting this done. What is the greatest single problem with what the federal government has done over the last 11 years to try and build homes?
With all due respect, Mr. McKenzie, I think you need to have a talk with your colleague, Ms. Goodridge, because, you know, what we've been doing hasn't been working terribly well. It's time for a reset, absolutely. So it can't just be what the CMHC or what Canada Lands Company was doing in the past. Having said that, I would 100% agree with you that a reset is needed, and I would suggest, as I did in my deputation, that the reset starts with very clear goals. We will end homelessness by X date. We will have, you know, adequate housing for everyone by X date. It's followed up with a very clear sense of what our definitions are moving forward. It includes assisting non-market housing with the recognition that even at the highest possible rate I could imagine, which is 20%, it's now 4%, you'd still have 80 to 96% being provided by the private market. And it needs to be a lot more comprehensive in terms of its agreements. So there isn't a magic wand. There isn't one simple thing. But when you look at what's worked in other countries, it starts with clear goals, clear definitions, clear financing pathways, and clear targets for the sub-levels of government.
Thank you, Doctor. You've been very clear in advice that you've provided to the National Housing Advocate. What I'm trying to understand is why more of it hasn't been accepted. I'm sure that's the frustration of your existence. But I'm also trying to get at what it is we have to do different.
I'm not sure I can sum it up in 10 words or less, other than treat the housing crisis seriously. Canada is worse off than other similar countries right now, and I don't feel that we're giving it the seriousness it deserves.
Well, if I were to suggest to you,
Yeah.
and some of the testimony, both between yourself and Mr. Irwin and the prior panel, is that we do this best when we do it closest to the people who need the housing. So why do we have yet another federal government program, writ large, big numbers, big election promise, failure to get it done? Now, before I give you an opportunity to answer that, I actually want to move to Mr. Irwin and talk about specifics. Rather than go forward with a Build Canada Homes tremendously ambitious target, which is not in any way, shape, or form going to be realized, and I think we all know that by this point, wouldn't it have been a better strategy to, instead of learning a new program, as you indicated, we're between programs is really what we are. It's been a year, and so that's not helpful. That's not helpful in getting houses built. Would we have been better off if we just increased funding through the Rapid Housing Initiative, an existing program being administered by CMHC?
I think that's a difficult question, and I don't believe I probably have all the knowledge and sort of capacity to fully answer that. What I can,
but those you represent, who build rental homes, at least knew how that program worked.
Sure, we do, and I can talk all day long about CMHC. Build Canada Homes, I think it's fair to say that my members are not the primary audience for that program. We are trying to figure out how we can engage with it, and I think there are opportunities. But I think I'm just being forthright in saying that it is meant to be supporting and building non-market housing, and that's not primarily what my members do. So while we support its goals and want to work with them to see, because I have always said, we should be building. The government shouldn't be building. It should be the ones who, Dr. Whitson said, do what they do best. That's what we do best.
Thank you, Mr. McKenzie. We'll conclude with Mr. Saini. Mr. Saini, 4 or 5 minutes.
Thank you, witnesses. Thank you for your time. I wanted to talk to something different. I think listening to both of you, I think the three things that I see which are the biggest problems is permitting at the city level, the amount of time it takes, the development cost charges, which are pounding, $80,000, $90,000 per unit, and the financing of these projects. In the mid-70s, interest rate was 10, 12, 13% for years and years and years. Why are those issues a problem? Do we need to find a different source of doing the development cost charges so municipalities are not burdened with it? I just wanted to see a solution where the housing affordability become reality.
I think that long-term secured finance, which was frankly the secret sauce, the baguette magique, in the from the mid-60s to, let's say, the mid-80s, is terribly important. If I was to answer one thing that needs to change, it needs to be long-term, as low rate as possible financing. Why didn't that work? Well, it was the early 80s that interest rates started going up and the federal government freaked out because it was locked into a lot of long-term low-rate financing for non-market housing. And that's sort of when the wheels fell off. So there, even if it's 5-year renewable, et cetera, and I'm sorry, I'm a wonk, so I start getting into the details of finance. There needs to be a clear financing stream and there needs to be federal leadership, for that kind of capital cost. There needs to be assistance with operating costs and rent assistance from provinces. There needs to be assistance with rapid approvals from municipalities. They each have their roles. I completely agree that local leadership and coordination is key, but there needs to be national leadership as well. And since I'm speaking to a national group today, I'm calling for national leadership.
Mr. Urban, development cost charges, should they be the responsibility of the municipal government, or should they, federal and provincial government should be the one who should be building infrastructure for?
I think based on where we are today, current sort of method or the current sort of structure around how development charges are addressed isn't working. So I think we do need to think about how we address paying for development-related infrastructure, housing-related infrastructure differently. Municipalities only have so many revenue tools. I think they are feeling very overwhelmed with it. And you talked about, decades ago, different interest rates. Of course, development charges weren't nearly as impactful, or they didn't even exist many decades ago. It wasn't the same impact on the cost to build. When it's $900,000 to build an apartment in Toronto or $700,000 to build an apartment in Ottawa, I think we have a problem. And that's not the sole problem, but I think it's a big one. So I do think, amortizing the cost over the life of the infrastructure, you're putting pipe in the ground, that pipe's going to be useful for 30, 40, 50 years. Right now, development charges mean that's paid all up front. I think we have to look at how we can better amortize the cost, how we can better finance the cost, who's responsible. Ultimately, I think we don't have enough time today to get into that. But I do think it's fair to say that it can't be the municipality alone, and developers are going to do their part. We're not looking to get out of our obligation, but it's about saying if we want to build more housing and we want it to be more affordable, then we can't keep doing things the way we've been doing it. We have to do things differently, period.
See, I represent one of the ridings in British Columbia, and the permitting process in the city of Surrey is taking up to a year from the beginning till they're ready. And then on top of that, you have $80,000 to $90,000 per unit on the development. How can we survive?
Did you say it takes up to a year for the permit process?
Yeah.
Can I come shake your hand?
Yeah, exactly. That's lucky.
Can I hold a parade in your town?
Yeah.
That's not. I don't mean to be glib, but that's not. We want to do better than that, but that's a lot better than a lot of other places.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
Yeah, and wow. And what can the federal government do to bring down approval times and bring down development charges? And again, someone's got to put the thumb down on that.
Thank you, Mr. Sini, and thank you to the witnesses. This concludes the second round of today's committee hearing. So the witnesses can go. Before we suspend, the bells are ringing, so there is votes. I had scheduled an additional 30 minutes to deal with two items, Centennial Flame and drafting instructions on this report. Is it the will of the committee to return after the vote to see if we can do that, or would you option of me scheduling it on Monday?
Could we try to do this in the next 5 minutes?
Can we do this?
Yeah.
Do what? Drafting instructions?
Sure.
Okay. Yep.
Do you want to do it in public?
No, we cannot. I have to suspend to go in camera, and that's going to take the 5 minutes.
What about for the Centennial Flame? Does that have to be done in camera? Because my understanding is that might just be a secret ballot.
Oh, yes, I have these lovely
So if that's the case, could we vote?
There could be discussions. I'll seek direction. Give me directions on... Madame LaRouche, répétez.
Je pense qu'on est capable en...
I think we can quickly do the Centennial Flame, and then the drafting instructions usually don't take a lot of time. We can come back after the vote and finish around 11.
Mercy.
Then it gives time to tally it while we're voting.
Okay, we're going to suspend for the vote, and then we will follow.
Nice try.
We do have problems, yeah, and I have to chair a committee at 11. So do you want to do it on Monday?
The drafting instructions or
And the Centennial
How is that
Flame.
going to affect what's already planned?
I would just take 20 minutes.
Sure, let's do that.
Okay, I'm seeing to get a consensus that we will adjourn the meeting, and the two items that we're doing in committee business, we'll schedule them on Monday. C'est bon? C'est bon? Bon? The committee is will of the committee to adjourn. The committee is adjourned. Adjourned.